Hello everyone, welcome to my very first video demonstration in Red Robin Studios. The builders are out, all of the paints and equipments are in, and next week one of my ex-students is coming round and he's going to do a short film of a studio tour so you can have a proper look around and see everything that there is on offer. But I thought for this session it would be good to just show you a few of my materials and have a little experiment and play around with how they work together, just to give you a little taster of some of the warm-up activities that we'll be doing in the core drawing and painting course. So what I'm working with today is a small selection. So I'm going to be using some watercolours. And I find that one really nice way of arranging watercolour paints is like this, on a lovely big palette, all around the edge. You squeeze the tubes out around the side and then you can just let them dry in between lessons, and when you add water you resurrect the colour and you've got lovely big mixing spaces in there. So that's my watercolour palette. And then I'm also going to be showing you these little beauties. So this is a little mini watercolour palette, but it's made by a brand called Nexus, which is the school supplies brand. But I discovered these a few years ago and I've been hooked ever since. They're very, very intensely pigmented watercolours, and really they're like inks, solid inks. So they come up with a much more vibrant colour than your standard watercolours. So I love working with those, and kids love those as well. And then alongside that, I'm going to show you quite a few things actually. We'll be working with some permanent fine liners, which keep their colour when washed over the top with inks. We're going to be messing around with some actual inks. And what I've done is I've transferred them into these little brush pens, and what that does is it means that you can work with inks kind of cleanly and calmly without the risk of ink pots spilling over and blobbing everywhere. It's just a really nice way of containing the inks and getting a little bit more control. So loads of colours to choose from there, and also there's a selection of watercolour brushes filled with just plain water, which can be quite handy. We will also have a little look at the end at a couple of different types of colouring pencil, which can be layered on over the top of inks and watercolours quite nicely. One brand, these are Inktense pencils, and they're water soluble and again very highly pigmented. And these ones are made by Prismacolor. Cost an absolute fortune, but last for a long time, and lovely pigment too. You can blend those together. If you press really hard with those, they actually look like paint on the page, so those are lovely too. So I'm going to try and do a little experimentation exercise, nothing too complicated, just to show you how some of these materials behave. Okay, so I'm going to set it up so hopefully you can see everything quite well. You can see my watercolour pad, which is just kind of cheap, relatively cheap watercolour paper, just for experimenting with, and my watercolour palette. And I've pre-mixed just a couple of colours ready by just adding some water to these colours around the edge. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a bit more of this pink, quite nice. I'm going to just make some marks on the page, and I'm going to just work in a way that feels a bit instinctive. So this is not about drawing anything realistically, it's about just making some shapes that look pleasing to you. So there's absolutely no planning in this stage whatsoever, and I think, you know, if you were going to come to a beginner's class, sometimes it's just good to take some space for yourself to play with materials, because there's so much to learn about how they behave. You know, so now I'm just dropping in a second colour on top of that purple, and then you can play and see what happens when they mix. So maybe I'll do a big shape. I don't know why, I just feel like doing a big shape. Nice contrasting sort of yellow ochre colour. And just see it maybe how much variety you can play with something like this. So it's kind of a mark making. So just do a spiral and then maybe some lines inside. Don't know why. Okay, so now we've got some marks down on the paper. That's kind of layer one of the experiment. So the next step is to work with some fine liner pens. Now for this kind of thing, it's quite important that you use permanent fine liners, because otherwise when you go over the top with a second layer of ink, they bleed and they run and they can kind of mess up your colours really. So I've got a selection of fine liners of all different widths. I don't quite know what I plan to do with them yet, but the idea here is to just have a little look at the shapes you've made and see if they put you in mind of anything, and then you can start drawing over the top. It doesn't have to be objects, it can be just patterns and marks and shapes, whatever you see in the page really, and whatever you feel comfortable having a go at. So I'm going to start, the first thing I see here is something, it just looks a little bit planet-like, so I'm going to go over the top with some craters. With this, I don't know why, just these remind me of planets. I'm going to need to do some kind of ring shapes around this one. And then take all my lids off. This one's a bit thicker. Some darker. Make them go a bit wobbly. Do some here too. The other thing that we do when we create is, as well as wanting to even everything out and space it evenly on the page, the other thing we do is we have a tendency to draw one of everything and then move on and feel like we need to draw something different. Whereas actually repetition is really cool in art and it can create great impact. But for some reason, we often find that we don't naturally do it. So I'm going to have a bit of repetition in here, and I'm going to do all of these planets with quite similar. So we've just got a real cluster of them. This one's had a bite taken out of it. This can be a ringed one. So I'm kind of deliberately keeping my lines a bit wobbly, because often, I don't know, they just feel like they've got a bit more character that way. Graphic designer might disagree with me. Okay, so this should not be a stressful exercise in any way. So I've got my little cluster of planets, which I'm quite happy with, and then I'm going to think, what does the other stuff remind me of? So this reminds me of a cucumber, or maybe a courgette. So I'm going to do some little wobbly bits at the edge, and then I'm going to do some lines.
Tonight we fly over the houses, the streets and the trees, over the dogs down below. They'll bark at our shadows as we float by on the breeze. Tonight we fly over the chimney tops, skylights and slates, looking into all your life.
Okay, so now we've got some detail added into those shapes with fine liner pens, which just brings the patterns out a little bit more and starts to bring the page to life. Add a few characters, a few random objects and patterns here and there, and then I'm going to work into the next stage, which is using the much more densely pigmented watercolours, which are in the brush pens and also in my Nexus palette that I was showing you before. Darker inks, which has added a little bit more detail, a few more patterns here and there, made everything richer and more vibrant. And the final material I want to just show you are the Prismacolor pencils, which are the ones I showed you at the beginning. These are not water soluble, but very highly pigmented, which means you can actually go over the top of inks quite nicely with them, which you wouldn't be able to do with ordinary colour pencils so well. So just to demonstrate that, so this little cat, if I wanted to have some yellow stripes, you can actually go light on top of dark, which is quite unusual really with a colouring pencil, and it's because there's so much pigment in there. It shows up over the top of the inks. So I'm going to have a little play with these, and then also maybe with the ink tints. Now these are by Derwent and they are water soluble, and you can blend those with water on a brush if you wanted to add more shading. Probably got enough of that now. I might just add a couple of finishing touches and then we'll call it a day. There's only so much you can do. Okay, so I'll have a quick play with the pencils now.
Tonight we fly over the houses, the streets and the trees, over the dogs down below. They'll bark at our shadows